On the early morning of February 15, 1994, 11 people perished in a fire at an abandoned building on Chicago's South Side. All young, all members of the same street crew. The method arson, deliberate, calculated, and executed with chilling precision. The perpetrators, two brothers from the same neighborhood, Marcus and Terrell Johnson, who'd grown up 3 blocks away from their victims. The Chicago Fire Department would later classify it as one of the city's deadliest incidents of gang violence in the 1990s. But the reason behind the inferno wasn't a drug deal gone wrong. Wasn't a turf war over territory. Wasn't even retaliation for a shooting. It was a leather jacket stolen during a dice game 2 weeks earlier. And 2 brothers who believed that disrespect once given demanded an answer written in fire. West Englewood stretched across Chicago's South Side like an open wound that never quite healed. In 1994, the neighborhood covered roughly 2 square miles, home to approximately 40,000 people, most of them African American, most of them struggling. The area was bounded by Garfield Boulevard to the north, Racine Avenue to the east, and sprawled west toward Ashland Avenue, where old commercial buildings stood like tombstones, marking the death of better times. Population density meant you were never truly alone. But somehow everyone felt isolated, trapped in a place where the American dream had packed its bags and moved to the suburbs decades ago. The winter of 1994 hit Chicago hard. February temperatures hovered in the low 20s during the day, dropping to single digits at night. The cold had a particular quality on the south side. It came off Lake Michigan with a bite that went straight through your coat and settled in your bones. The street smelled like exhaust from CTA buses, fried chicken from Harold's on 63rd Street, hem music, and underneath it all, the metallic scent of old radiators working overtime in buildings that had seen better days. At night, when the temperature really dropped, you could hear the city settling, ice cracking in gutters, wind rattling chain link fences, the distant sound of the Green Line elevated train clattering past on its endless loop. But 1994 wasn't just another hard Chicago winter. The city was in the middle of a transformation that nobody wanted to talk about. The Chicago Housing Authority had started demolishing the massive public housing projects that had defined the South Side for generations. Robert Taylor Homes, Cabrini Green, Henry Horner. The official line was urban renewal. The reality was forced displacement. Thousands of families scattered across neighborhoods like West Englewood, bringing with them gang affiliations, old beefs, and territorial claims that meant nothing in their new surroundings. This displacement shattered the old gang structures, the corporate-style organizations that had ruled Chicago's streets in the 80s, the gangster disciples, the black disciples, the vice lords had fractured into dozens of smaller crews. No more hierarchy, no more rules handed down from leaders in prison. Just blocks, corners, and young men willing to die for a patch of concrete that wasn't worth dying for. Violence became expressive rather than instrumental. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect, about reputation, about not letting anyone think you were soft, because soft meant dead. Marcus Anthony Johnson was 27 years old that February, though people who knew him said he looked older, weathered by years that had demanded too much too soon. He stood 6'2", with a lean, wiry build that came from metabolism and stress rather than gym time. His most distinctive feature was a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. A souvenir from a bottle that caught him wrong during a fight when he was 16. The scar gave him a permanent look of skepticism, like he was always questioning whatever you were saying. Every morning, Marcus woke at 6:15 a.m. in the basement apartment he rented on South Hermitage Avenue. He'd make instant coffee, Folgers, never the cheap stuff, and smoke 2 Newports on the back steps before heading to his job at Big Mike's Auto Repair on Ashland Avenue. He'd been working there for 4 years, was good with his hands, could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone. His boss, Mike Torelli, an old Italian guy who'd refused to leave the neighborhood when everyone else did, paid Marcus under the table, $9,000 an hour, and never asked questions about where he'd been or what he'd done. Marcus lived alone, never married, no kids that he claimed. His mother had passed from breast cancer in 1989. His father, James Anthony Johnson, had been shot and killed on the corner of 69th and Halsted in August 1987. Caught in crossfire, during a dispute that had nothing to do with him. Marcus had been 20 years old when he watched his father bleed out on hot summer pavement, while people stood around taking pictures, instead of calling for help. What Marcus valued most, more than money, more than reputation on the streets, was the code his father had taught him. Never let anyone make you look weak. Never back down from disrespect. Never forget where you came from or who raised you. And never, ever let someone take what's yours without consequences. His father had left him almost nothing. No inheritance, no property, no college fund. Just one possession, a brown leather jacket from his time in the army, worn during the final years of the Korean War. The jacket was old. The leather cracked in places, the lining torn. But it was all Marcus had left of the man who'd raised him to believe that honor meant something, even when the world suggested otherwise. By early 1994, Marcus was tired. Tired of the grind at the shop. Tired of watching the neighborhood decay. Tired of losing friends to bullets or prison, or the slow death of crack cocaine. Music. He'd stayed out of major trouble, kept his head down, worked his job, went home. He wasn't trying to be a gangster. He just wanted to survive. His younger brother, Terrell, was different. Terrell James Johnson, 23 years old, 5'11", with a stocky, powerful build from years of unloading trucks at a warehouse on the southwest side. Where Marcus was quiet and calculating, Terrell was emotional, reactive, the kind of man who felt everything intensely and showed it. He dropped out of high school in 11th grade. Tried to join the army, but got rejected for a juvenile record. He'd picked up at 16 secrecy aggravated assault. Charges later dropped. Terrell had a girlfriend, Chanace, 21, who worked at a grocery store on 63rd Street. They had plans, vague dreams about maybe getting married, maybe moving somewhere else. Anywhere that wasn't West Inglewood. But Terrell's defining characteristic was his absolute loyalty to his older brother. Marcus had raised him after their father died, had kept him fed and clothed when their mother was too sick to work. When you hurt Marcus, you hurt Terrell. When you disrespected Marcus, you might as well have spit in Terrell's face. The brothers weren't particularly close in the day-to-day sense. They didn't talk about feelings or sit around reminiscing, but they understood each other completely. They shared a code that required no discussion. The Ashland crew wasn't a gang in the traditional sense. They were a loose collection of young men, teenagers and 20-somethings who'd grown up in the blocks around Ashland Avenue, between 65th and 71st Streets. No real leadership structure, no colors or hand signs that meant anything beyond their immediate area. Just friends, cousins, guys who'd known each other since elementary school and who hung out together because there wasn't much else to do and because safety came in numbers. Raymond Thomas, everyone called him Ray Ray, was the crew's unofficial leader at 22 years old. Tall, charismatic, with a smile that could charm grandmothers and intimidate rivals. Music. He'd been a decent basketball player at Inglewood High School. Good enough to start on varsity his senior year, but not good enough for college scouts to care. After graduation in 1989, he drifted into the life that claimed so many Southside kids. No job, no prospects. Just days spent on corners and nights spent looking for something. Anything to break the monotony. Ray Ray wasn't a killer, wasn't a drug kingpin. He'd been arrested twice, once for possession of marijuana, once for retail theft. Both cases dismissed or pleaded down to probation. He still lived with his mother in a 2-bedroom apartment on South Ashland. He helped her with rent when he could, which wasn't often. His girlfriend, Kesha Wallace, 18, was 3 months pregnant with what would have been Ray Ray's first child. They talked about names. For a boy, maybe Raymond Jr. For a girl, maybe Destiny. They'd never get the chance to decide. The crew included Ray Ray's cousin, Antoine Mercer, 24, who'd actually made it to college. 2 years at a community college downstate studying business before money ran out, and he came back home. There was Jerome Little, 21, who just landed a job interview with the city's sanitation department, scheduled for February 15th at 9:00 a.m., an appointment he'd never make. LaShonda Price, 20, was trying to distance herself from the crew, had enrolled in a nursing assistant program at a vocational school, and was 3 weeks from finishing when the fire took her. Darnell Hayes, 19, was 3 months from high school graduation. Spent his free time writing rap lyrics in notebooks he carried everywhere. These weren't hardened criminals. They were kids, really, trapped in a place and time that offered limited options and unlimited ways to fail. They hung out together because that's what you did. They talked big about money and respect and making it out of the neighborhood. But mostly they just passed time, waiting for something to happen that would change everything. Music, the catalyst, came on January 28, 1994, a Friday night so cold that ice formed in perfect geometric patterns on car windows. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees by midnight. A group of 8 crew members, including Ray Ray, had gathered in the basement of an abandoned building on Ashland Avenue. The same building where they'd be gathering 2 weeks later for a very different reason. They were playing dice, craps, betting money nobody could afford to lose on the roll of worn plastic cubes that decided everything. Marcus Johnson showed up around 11:30 p.m. Not part of the crew, but tolerated because he'd grown up in the area, because everyone knew his reputation as someone who didn't start trouble, but could finish it if pressed. He'd been invited by his younger brother, Terrell, who'd known some of these guys from school. Marcus wore his father's leather jacket against the bitter cold. Inside the basement, a space heater glowed orange, fighting a losing battle against Chicago winter. The game went bad around 1:15 a.m. Marcus was up about $6, which felt like a fortune. Ray Ray was down more than he should have been, drinking cheap liquor that sharpened his edges instead of smoothing them. The details of what happened next vary depending on who tells the story, but the outcome was clear. Words were exchanged. Marcus accused Ray Ray of trying to cheat on a roll. Ray Ray laughed, said something about Marcus being too serious, maybe mentioned something about the jacket, about Marcus wearing his dead daddy's coat like some kind of shrine. Marcus stood up, said something quiet that nobody quite heard, and started to leave. And that's when Ray Ray, emboldened by liquor and an audience, grabbed the leather jacket off Marcus's shoulders as he walked toward the stairs, held it up like a trophy, music, and said something about keeping it as payment for disrespecting him in front of his crew. The room went silent. Everyone understood they were watching something dangerous unfold. Terrell stepped forward, ready to turn this into a fight right there. But Marcus put his hand on his brother's shoulder, shook his head, looked at Ray Ray for a long moment, then walked up the stairs and out into the 8-degree night, without his father's jacket, without another word. Terrell followed, confused, angry, ready to go back down there and take the jacket by force. But Marcus just kept walking, his breath visible in the freezing air, his footsteps crunching on ice-covered sidewalk. Finally, 3 blocks later, he stopped, turned to his brother. His face showed nothing. No anger, no fear. No emotion at all. Marcus said quietly that it wouldn't be tonight. But they were getting the jacket back, and the crew was going to learn what it costs to take what isn't theirs. What Ray Ray and the Ashland crew didn't know was that the jacket they'd taken wasn't just leather and thread. It wasn't just an old piece of military surplus. It was the only thing Marcus had left of the man who taught him that your word was your bond, that respect was currency more valuable than money, and that when someone crosses certain lines, there's a debt that has to be paid. They didn't know that Marcus Johnson never forgot anything, that he'd inherited his father's patience along with his coat, a music that he could wait, could plan, could turn cold fury into calculated action. And they definitely didn't know that in exactly 17 days, on Valentine's Day 1994, Marcus and his brother would make them pay for that moment of disrespect in a way that would shock even Chicago's violence hardened South Side. Music, the week after the dice game incident, moved slowly for Marcus Johnson, each day bleeding into the next with the weight of unfinished business pressing down on his chest like a physical thing. He went to work at Big Mike's Auto Repair every morning, arrived on time, did his job with the same methodical precision. He applied to everything, changed oil, replaced brake pads, diagnosed transmission problems. But his mind was somewhere else, replaying that moment in the basement over and over. Ray holding up his father's jacket like a trophy while his crew laughed. The look on Terrell's face when Marcus stopped him from fighting. The sound of their footsteps on frozen sidewalk walking away empty-handed. Mike Torelli noticed something was off. On Thursday, February 3rd, around 20:30 in the afternoon, he found Marcus standing motionless in the garage bay, staring at nothing, a wrench in his hand. Mike asked if he was all right, wiping his hands on a rag that had been white once decades ago. Marcus blinked, came back from wherever his mind had gone, and replied that he was good. Mike pressed him, noting he'd been standing there, holding the wrench for 5 minutes without moving. Marcus looked down at his hand, like he'd forgotten it was there, saying he was just thinking about something. Mike studied him for a long moment. The old man had seen enough in his 63 years to recognize when someone was carrying violence around inside them, nurturing it, letting it grow. Mike quietly advised him, "Whatever you're thinking about doing, think twice. Then think a third time. Prison ain't worth it." Marcus nodded, said nothing, and went back to work on the Chevy Impala in front of him. But Mike's words didn't change anything. Some decisions get made in places deeper than thought, in the part of you that calculates debts and consequences and decides what you're willing to pay. That Sunday, February 6th, Marcus took his grandmother to church like he'd been doing every other week since his mother died. Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church on 71st Street, a brick building that had survived riots and white flight and decades of neighborhood decay through sheer stubborn faith. His grandmother, Dorothy Johnson, was 74 years old, barely 5 feet tall, with hands twisted from arthritis and a mind sharp as broken glass. After service, they sat in her kitchen on South Hermitage Avenue, the same apartment where Marcus had grown up, where his father had grown up before him. The kitchen smelled like collard greens and cornbread, smells that carried memory in them. That made Marcus feel 8 years old again, sitting at this same table while his father told stories about Korea, about places so cold your breath froze in the air, about the jacket he'd worn that kept him alive through 2 winters. His grandmother said he'd been quiet, asking if something was weighing on his mind as she set a plate in front of him. Marcus ate slowly, buying time. The greens tasted as they always had, perfect. Seasoned just right. He claimed it was just work, that there was always something broken that needed fixing. She looked at him the way grandmothers do, a look that sees through lies to the truth underneath. She observed that he and his brother had been spending a lot of time together lately. Noting Terrell had come by Wednesday, saying little, just looking like he was carrying the weight of the world. Marcus insisted they were fine. Just family stuff. Dorothy reached across the table, put her twisted hand on top of his. Her skin was paper, thin, spotted with age. She said softly that his daddy was a good man, but he had a hard streak in him, wouldn't back down from nothing, and that got him killed. She squeezed his hand, warning that Marcus had that same streak. "Her music," she implored him. "Whatever's happening, whatever someone did to you, ask yourself if it's worth losing everything." Marcus looked at his grandmother, this woman who'd buried her husband, buried her son, and was strong enough to keep living anyway. He wanted to tell her about the jacket, about the disrespect, about how some things demand an answer. But what could he say that would make sense? That he was planning to hurt people, maybe end them over a piece of leather. Instead, he said, "I love you, Grandma. You know that, right?" She studied his face for a long moment. "I know, baby, I know." That was Sunday. On Monday, everything started to change. Marcus began his preparation not with weapons, but with information. For the next week, he moved through West Inglewood like a ghost, watching, learning, mapping out the Ashland cruise patterns with the same attention to detail he brought to engine work. He knew Ray and his crew gathered at the abandoned building on Ashland Avenue most nights. The same basement where they'd played dice, where the jacket had been taken. The building was a 3-story structure that should have been condemned years ago. Windows boarded up, front door hanging loose on rusted hinges. The city had cut power to the building back in 1991, but somehow the crew had rigged up electricity, probably tapping into lines from a neighboring building. On Tuesday, February 8th, Marcus walked past the building around 11 p.m., counting 6 people going inside, including Ray. On Wednesday, same time, he counted 8. Thursday, 7. Music Friday, 9. They had a pattern. They showed up between 10:30 and 1100 p.m., stayed until 2 or 3 in the morning, doing whatever young men with no jobs and no future do, to kill time drinking, smoking, playing cards, talking about money they didn't have and dreams that would never come true. Marcus noted something else. The building had 2 exits, a front door on Ashland Avenue, and a back door opening into an alley. Both doors opened outward, an old Chicago fire code designed to let people escape quickly in an emergency. The windows on the ground floor were boarded solid, but the second and third floor windows were broken out. Just empty frames. Metal security grates covered the ground floor windows from inside, another obstacle to anyone trying to get out in a hurry. On Saturday, February 12th, Marcus drove to a hardware store on Western Avenue, 3 miles from the neighborhood, far enough that nobody would recognize him. He bought 3 heavy-duty chains, the kind used to secure motorcycles or close industrial gates. Each chain was 6 feet long, with thick links that would take bolt cutters to break. For $47 for all 3, he paid cash, kept the receipt in his pocket. At a second store, a mom and pop place in Bridgeport, he bought 4 padlocks. The good kind, brass cylinders with hardened steel shackles, another $32. At a gas station on Archer Avenue, Marcus filled 5 red plastic 5-gallon gasoline cans. The attendant, a Pakistani man who barely spoke English, didn't ask questions. 89 cents per gallon, paid cash. Marcus loaded the cans into the trunk of a 1987 Bic Regal he borrowed from his cousin, telling him he needed to move some stuff and would have it back by Monday. His cousin asked no questions, because on the south side, sometimes it was better not to know. Back in his apartment, Marcus spread out a map of the neighborhood on his kitchen table. He marked the building's location with a red X, marked escape routes, marked where police stations were located. The nearest was 6 blocks away on Racine Avenue. Response time probably 5 to 8 minutes, depending on other calls. He marked hospitals. Stroger Hospital downtown, too far to matter. Fire stations. Engine Company 61 on 63rd Street, about 7 blocks away. While Marcus planned his careful choreography of violence, Terrell struggled with doubt that came in waves, unpredictable and overwhelming. On Wednesday night, February 9th, Chenise cornered him in their apartment, her eyes red from crying. She demanded to know where he'd been going every night, warning him not to lie. Terrell sat on the edge of their bed, head in his hands. The apartment was small, just a studio really, but they'd made it home. Pictures on the wall, dishes in the sink, a life they'd built together, fragile and imperfect. He told her he was just helping Marcus with something. She pressed, asking what Marcus could need help with at midnight that had him acting like he was already in prison. Terrell looked up at her. Chenice was beautiful. Always had been. With her hair pulled back and her work uniform still on from the grocery store. She deserved better than this, better than him, better than a life spent worrying whether her man would come home or end up dead in some alley. Terrell said carefully that some guys had disrespected Marcus, took something that belonged to their father, and they were getting it back. Chenice asked how they would get it back, but Terrell didn't answer. Chenice sat down next to him, took his hand. She pleaded that whatever Marcus was planning, he didn't have to be part of it. She reminded him he always talked about getting out of here, about moving somewhere better. "This ain't the way, baby," she warned. "This is the way you stay trapped here forever." He knew she was right. Knew it in every part of him that was still rational, still capable of seeing consequences beyond the immediate need for revenge. But there was another part of him, louder, more insistent, that remembered his father bleeding out while strangers took pictures. That remembered his brother raising him, when their mother couldn't. That remembered what loyalty meant, when everything else was stripped away. Terrell said quietly that he couldn't let Marcus do this alone. That he was his brother. Chenice pulled her hand away. "Then I guess you made your choice." She didn't leave. Had nowhere to go. But something broke between them that night. Some trust that might never be repaired. At that moment, while Terrell sat in his apartment, calculating the price of brotherhood, Ray Thomas was at his mother's place watching the Bulls game on a TV that got fuzzy reception, because the cable bill hadn't been paid in 3 months. Michael Jordan was destroying the Knicks, making it look easy like he always did. Ray's mother, Linda Thomas, 51 years old and worn down by decades of single motherhood, brought him a plate of food, spaghetti with meat sauce, cheap and filling. She asked if he was staying out of trouble. The same question she'd been asking since he was 12. He replied, "Yeah, Ma. I'm good." She told him that Kesha had come by yesterday, that she was showing now, and asked if he was thinking about getting a job, reminding him that being a father means providing. Ray nodded, only half listening. He had the leather jacket, Marcus's father's jacket, hanging on the back of a chair in his room. He hadn't worn it yet. Wasn't sure he wanted to. Taking it had seemed funny at the time, a way to assert dominance, to put Marcus in his place. But now, with a baby coming and real life pressing in, it felt stupid, childish. He'd thought about giving it back. Maybe just leaving it somewhere Marcus would find it. No words, no apology, just make the problem disappear. But pride wouldn't let him. Giving it back now would look like weakness. Would make him seem soft in front of his crew. And on the South Side in 1994, soft meant vulnerable, meant dead. Ray didn't know that Marcus had already decided. Music didn't know about the chains and padlocks, sitting in the trunk of a borrowed Bic. Didn't know that in less than 48 hours, his decision to keep that jacket would cost him everything. On Sunday night, February 13th, around 11:30 p.m., Marcus and Terrell sat at their grandmother's kitchen table. The house was quiet. Dorothy asleep upstairs, the radiator hissing and clanking like it had been doing for 40 years. On the table between them, 2 sets of work gloves, 3 chains, 4 padlocks, and keys to the borrowed book. Neither brother had said much all evening. They'd watched television with their grandmother, ate dinner, helped her wash dishes, a normal Sunday routine. But both of them knew this might be the last normal Sunday they'd ever have. Terrell asked Marcus if he was sure about this, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at his brother, truly looked at him, maybe seeing him clearly for the first time in weeks. Terrell was 23, but looked younger, his face still holding traces of the kid Marcus had raised. He had a girlfriend who loved him, had a job, had a chance, slim but real, at something better than this neighborhood. This life. This cycle of violence and retaliation. Marcus told Terrell he didn't have to be there, that he could do this alone. Terrell countered, "That ain't what I asked. I asked if you're sure." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Was he sure? In the sense of knowing it was right, knowing it was justified, knowing that disrespect demanded an answer. Yes, he was sure. But in the sense of understanding consequences, of accepting that tomorrow he might be dead, or in prison for the rest of his life, of knowing that what he was about to do would destroy more than just his enemies, in that sense. No, he wasn't sure at all. Marcus said finally, "They took Dad's jacket. They laughed about it. They made us walk away looking weak. So we go there tomorrow. We take it back. We beat their asses if we have to." But Terrell gestured at the chains and locks on the table, saying, "This is something else, man. This is something we can't take back." Marcus simply replied, "I know." Terrell reminded Marcus of what Chenise had said, that she had a choice, to be part of what he was planning or to choose a future. He conceded she was right. Marcus told Terrell he should choose the future. But Terrell responded that he wasn't choosing that. When Marcus asked why not, he stood up, walked to the kitchen window, and looked out at the dark street. A few streetlights still worked, casting yellow pools on cracked pavement. A car drove by, bass thumping. Somewhere a dog barked. Same sounds, same sights, same neighborhood that had swallowed his father, his mother, most of the people he'd known growing up. Music. And here he was about to feed himself to it, too. "Because I'm tired," Marcus said. "Tired of being disrespected. Tired of letting people take what's mine. Tired of being quiet and calm, and doing the right thing while everything falls apart anyway. Dad taught us, you don't let people punk you. Said that was the only rule that mattered. You stand up, you hit back, you show them there's consequences." Terrell reminded him. "Dad also got killed standing up." "I know," Marcus said. They sat in silence for another minute. Then Terrell reached across the table, picked up one set of work gloves, and put them in his pocket. He said, "If you're doing this, I'm there. That's the only choice I got." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to send his brother away, wanted to protect him the way he'd been protecting him since their father died. But he knew Terrell knew that stubborn loyalty ran deeper than logic, deeper than self-preservation. The Johnson brothers went together, or not at all. At 11:47 p.m., they left their grandmother's house. Marcus kissed her forehead while she slept, whispered something she didn't hear. Downstairs, they loaded the chains and gasoline cans into the book's trunk, careful and methodical. The night was cold, 17 degrees, the kind of cold that made the air feel solid. Their breath came out in white clouds, dissipating quickly. Terrell knew what his brother was planning. He'd seen that look before, the same flat, emotionless stare their father had the night before he died. Walking into a situation everyone knew might turn deadly. It was the look of a man who'd already made peace with whatever hell was coming, who'd calculated the cost and decided he could pay it. Marcus had been wearing that look for 2 weeks straight, and now Terrell felt it settling onto his own face like a mask he couldn't take off. They sat in the car for a moment before starting the engine, Marcus' hands on the steering wheel, Terrell's hands in his lap. Brothers separated by 4 years and a lifetime of shared history, their father's death, their mother's slow decline, the neighborhood that raised them and trapped them in equal measure. Marcus said it was their last chance to walk away. Terrell thought about Cheney's, about the apartment they shared, about the life they'd talked about building, somewhere far from here. Then he thought about his brother, about loyalty, about the code their father had taught them before a bullet ended his ability to teach anything. Terrell observed that it was Valentine's Day tomorrow, and everyone would be focused on their girls, buying flowers and cards and hair expletive, so nobody would be paying attention to them. Marcus nodded, turned the key. The engine caught, rumbled to life. He pulled away from the curb slowly, carefully, like a man with all the time in the world. On February 14, 1994, while the rest of Chicago prepared for a day of romance and manufactured sentiment, the Johnson brothers drove through West Inglewood's empty streets with chains, padlocks, and 25 gallons of gasoline, heading toward a decision that would leave 11 people dead and change the South Side forever. What they were about to do wouldn't just end lives. It would shatter families, traumatize a community, and prove that sometimes the line between justice and murder was drawn in gasoline and lit with a match held by someone who decided that respect mattered more than mercy. 24:07 p.m. Monday, February 14, 1994, Valentine's Day. The temperature had dropped to 19 degrees, the kind of cold that turned exhaled breath into instant fog and made exposed skin ache within seconds. The streets of West Inglewood were mostly empty. People stayed inside on nights like this, huddled around space heaters and radiators that fought losing battles against Chicago winter. A few cars passed on Ashland Avenue, headlights cutting through darkness, drivers heading home from late shifts or liquor stores, or wherever people went, when they had nowhere else to be. Marcus Johnson sat behind the wheel of the borrowed Bic Regal, parked half a block from the abandoned building at 6743 South Ashland Avenue. Engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel with the same calm precision he brought to engine work at the shop. Through the windshield, he could see the building's front entrance, the door hanging crooked on rusted hinges, yellow light visible through gaps in the boarded windows where the Ashland crew had rigged their illegal electricity. He'd expected his hands to shake, expected fear, or maybe doubt at this final moment. Instead, he felt something else entirely, a cold, empty clarity. Like he was watching himself from outside his body, observing this version of Marcus Johnson, the one about to become a mass murderer, as if he were a stranger performing a role that had been written long ago. Terrell sat in the passenger seat, silent, breathing visible in the frigid air inside the car. His younger brother's hands were clenched into fists, knuckles white even in the dim light from street lamps. Marcus could feel Terrell's fear, his doubt, his desperate hope that maybe they'd turn around, drive away, find some other way to settle this debt. Marcus said quietly, "Last chance to walk away. Music. You can get out right now. Take the L train home. I won't hold it against you." Terrell looked at his brother, truly looked at him, maybe for the first time, seeing the emptiness that had settled into Marcus' eyes over the past 2 weeks. He asked, "You really going to do this over a jacket?" Marcus' voice was flat, emotionless. "It was never about the jacket. It's about them thinking they can disrespect us and walk away laughing." Terrell countered, "They're going to die, Marcus. All of them." "I know," Marcus said. A long moment of silence. The radiator in a nearby building hissed and clanked. Somewhere a dog barked twice, then went quiet. Life continuing its normal patterns while two brothers sat in a cold car calculating murder. Then Terrell said finally, "Then I'm with you. All the way." Marcus nodded once, checked his watch. 9:52 p.m. Through years of surveillance, he knew the pattern. Ray and his crew would be inside by now. Probably 8 or 9 of them. Maybe more on Valentine's Day, since nobody had girlfriends worth staying home for. They'd be in the basement where the space heater glowed, playing cards or dice, drinking cheap liquor, talking about money they didn't have, and dreams that would die tonight, At 10:58 p.m., Marcus and Terrell climbed out of the Bic. The cold hit immediately, brutal and unforgiving. They moved to the trunk, opened it carefully to minimize sound. Inside, 3 heavy chains, 4 padlocks, 5 red gasoline cans, 2 pairs of work gloves. Marcus handed 1 pair to Terrell. They pulled them on in silence. They carried the chains first. Marcus took the front entrance, Terrell the back alley door. The plan was simple, rehearsed mentally 100 times. Wrap the chains through the door handles and around nearby structural supports. Lock them with the padlocks. Make exit impossible. Then the gasoline. Then the match. 11:04 p.m. Music. Marcus approached the front door. Chain coiled in his gloved hands. Music drifted from inside. Something with heavy bass, too muffled to identify. Laughter. Voices raised in mock argument about a card game. Normal sounds of young men passing time, completely unaware that their time was running out. He wrapped the chain through the door handle, pulled it tight around a metal support beam that had once held the building's front awning. The chain rattled slightly, too loud in the quiet night. Marcus froze, listening. The music continued. Nobody had heard. He looped the chain twice more, then secured it with a padlock, tested it. The door wouldn't open more than 2 inches now, not without bolt cutters. Around back, Terrell did the same with the alley door. Marcus could picture his brother's hands shaking, could imagine the war happening inside Terrell's head. Loyalty versus survival, brotherhood versus conscience. But Terrell was a Johnson. When the choice came down to family or fear, there was no real choice at all. 11 p.m., both brothers met at the Bic. Neither spoke. They retrieved the gasoline cans, 2 for Terrell, 3 for Marcus, and carried them to the building's perimeter. The ground floor had been concrete at one time, but decades of decay had created cracks and gaps where gasoline could seep through to the basement level. Marcus unscrewed the first can's cap. The smell hit immediately. Sharp, chemical, unmistakable. He poured slowly, methodically, creating a perimeter around the building's foundation. The liquid gurgled from the can, splashed against concrete and dead weeds, pooled in cracks. 1 can, then another, then a third. Terrell worked the backside of the building, his movements faster, more erratic. Marcus could sense his brother's panic building, the reality of what they were doing finally settling in with its full weight. But Terrell kept pouring. The gasoline traced dark patterns on cold concrete, glistening under yellow street light. 11:23 p.m., they'd emptied all 5 cans. The building's foundation was surrounded by a ring of fuel soaked into every crack and crevice. The smell was overwhelming now, a toxic cloud that made both brothers' eyes water. Inside, the music continued. Nobody had noticed. Nobody had looked outside to see 2 men pouring death around their sanctuary. At that moment, while Marcus pulled a book of matches from his pocket, Ray Thomas was downstairs, holding a pair of 4s in a poker game he was losing badly. His cousin Antoine was dealing, talking about a girl he'd met at a bus stop. Jerome Little was counting money for tomorrow's job interview. 43, enough for bus fare and lunch. LaShonda Price was sitting in a corner, trying to study for her nursing assistant exam. Annoyed by the noise, but with nowhere else to go. Darnell Hayes was writing rap lyrics in his notebook. Words that would never be performed. Keisha Wallace, 3 months pregnant, was upstairs on the 2nd floor, lying on an old mattress, her back hurting, thinking about baby names. 11 people inside a building that was about to become their tomb. Marcus stood at the front entrance, match in hand, 1 small stick of wood and phosphorus. The difference between thought and action, between planning and execution, between being Marcus Johnson, auto mechanic, and becoming Marcus Johnson, mass murderer. He thought about his father, about the code they'd lived by, about respect and consequences, and what it meant to be a man who didn't let anyone make him look weak. He thought about his grandmother's words, Ask yourself if it's worth losing everything. Was it worth it? Marcus struck the match. The flame was tiny at first, dancing in the cold air. He held it for a moment, watching it burn down toward his gloved fingers. Still time to blow it out. Still time to turn around, go home. Let this grudge die the way most grudges die, slowly, painfully, but without bloodshed. But Ray had laughed, had taken the jacket like it was nothing, had made Marcus walk away looking weak in front of people who only respected strength. Marcus dropped the match. Levinson, 27 p.m. The gasoline ignited with a sound like the world inhaling, a soft whoosh that became a roar within seconds. Flames raced along the perimeter, following the fuel trail, climbing walls, finding gaps and cracks to pour through. Orange light bloomed in the darkness, casting wild shadows, turning cold night into hellish day. Inside the building, the first scream came at 11:28 p.m. Marcus and Terrell stood across the street watching. The fire spread faster than Marcus had imagined. Much faster. Within 90 seconds, the entire ground floor was engulfed. Flames visible through every gap in the boarded windows. Smoke poured from cracks, thick and black and toxic. The screaming intensified. Multiple voices now, panicked, overlapping. Someone tried the front door. Marcus could see it straining against the chains. Could hear metal rattling, but the chains held. The door opened 2 inches, no more. Just enough to see faces pressed against the gap, eyes wide with terror, mouths open. Screaming words that got lost in the roar of fire. Terrell whispered, "Oh God. Oh Jesus Christ, what did we do?" Marcus said nothing. Watched, felt nothing. The void inside him had become absolute. 11:33 p.m., a window on the second floor exploded outward, glass raining down onto the sidewalk. A figure appeared, Kesha Wallace, pregnant, desperate. She climbed onto the windowsill, flames behind her, a 25-foot drop below. For 3 seconds, she stood there, silhouetted against the inferno. Calculating impossible odds, she jumped. The impact was immediate and final. Her body hit concrete with a sound that would haunt Terrell for the rest of his life. A wet, heavy thud that meant bones breaking, organs rupturing, life ending. But Kesha was luckier than the ones still inside. 11:37 p.m. On the 3rd floor. 3 crew members had retreated as high as they could go, away from flames that climbed stairs like living things, consuming wood and drywall and old paint that had probably contained lead. They broke out windows with their fists, tried to breathe air that was slightly less toxic. One of them, Antoine Mercer, 24, a former college student, managed to get his upper body through a window frame. He looked down, saw the drop, saw Kesha's body on the sidewalk, saw Marcus and Terrell standing across the street watching. Antoine screamed for help, his voice raw from smoke inhalation, pleading for them to call the fire department, that they were dying. Marcus looked up at him. Their eyes met across the distance. Antoine saw something in Marcus' face that made him understand. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone had decided they should die. Antoine screamed, "Why? Why are you doing this?" Marcus didn't answer. The question didn't deserve an answer. Ray would know why. That was enough. Flames reached the 3rd floor at 11:41 p.m. Antoine pulled back inside, disappearing into smoke and fire. His screams continued for another 37 seconds, then stopped. While the building burned, 2 blocks away on Western Avenue, Linda Martinez was closing up her small corner grocery store, counting the day's receipts. 247. Not bad for a Monday. She hummed a song she'd heard on the radio that morning, thinking about her granddaughter's birthday party, coming up on Saturday. Through her store window, she could see orange light reflected on buildings. Could smell smoke carried on the wind. Thought maybe someone was burning trash in an alley. Didn't think much of it. In West Inglewood, you learn not to ask too many questions about strange things happening at night. At 11:43 p.m., Darnell Hayes reached a 2nd floor window on the building's east side. 19 years old. 3 months from high school graduation, his rap lyrics in his notebook downstairs, burning along with everything else. He made it through the window, gripped the ledge, tried to lower himself down to reduce the drop. His hands, slick with sweat and soot, slipped. He fell the full 20 feet, hit the alley pavement feet first. Both legs shattered on impact, the sound like branches snapping. He lay there screaming, unable to move. Both femurs compound fractured with bone protruding through skin. Above him, flames roared from the window he'd just escaped. Darnell would survive. He'd be the only one. But his legs would never heal right. He'd walk with a cane for the rest of his life. Constant pain, constant reminder of Valentine's Day, 1994. 11:47 p.m. Ray Thomas found himself trapped in the basement. The fire had started above, but smoke and heat descended with remorseless efficiency. The space heater that had kept them warm was now an irony. They'd die from heat, from flames, from their lungs filling with superheated air and toxic chemicals. Ray thought about his mother, about Kesha and the baby he'd never meet, about the leather jacket hanging in his bedroom that he'd taken as a joke, as a power move, as something stupid that seemed important 2 weeks ago. He understood now. Marcus had done this. Had to be Marcus. Nobody else had reason. Ray had crossed a line without realizing it. Had taken something that mattered in ways he hadn't understood. And now the price was being paid in full. 7 other crew members crowded around Ray in the basement. Jerome Little, LaShonda Price. 2 others whose names would be listed in police reports, whose families would identify their remains by dental records. The smoke was thick enough to cut, black and oily and poisonous. They couldn't see each other anymore, could only hear coughing, crying prayers to a God who wasn't answering tonight. Ray said, "I'm sorry." To no one in particular. His voice barely audible over the fire's roar. He was sorry for whatever he did, but sorry didn't matter. Debt had been calculated, and blood was the only currency accepted. At 11:52 p.m., the building's structural integrity failed. The fire had burned hot enough, long enough, to weaken support beams that had stood since the 1940s. The 3rd floor collapsed into the 2nd. The 2nd floor collapsed into the 1st. Everything fell into the basement where 8 people were trapped, crushing them under thousands of pounds of burning debris. The screaming stopped. Marcus watched the collapse, watched the building transform from a structure into a pile of ash. Flames shooting 50 feet into the air. Sparks carried on wind like fireflies dancing in hell. He felt Terrell beside him, felt his brother shaking, heard him crying. Terrell's voice was broken as he said, they had to go, that they had to go right now. But Marcus couldn't move. He stood there watching his work, watching 11 lives end, because of a leather jacket, and a code his father had taught him, and a need for respect that had metastasized into murder. Somewhere in that fire was the jacket itself, burning along with everything else, the leather cracking and blackening and turning to ash. Had it been worth it? Marcus didn't know, couldn't know. The question assumed there was a scale where these things could be measured, respect versus lives, honor versus humanity. But there was no scale. There was only fire and death, and the understanding that he'd crossed into territory from which there was no return. At 11:06 p.m., sirens finally cut through the night. Fire engines from Engine Company 61 on 63rd Street, 7 blocks away. Someone had called it in. Probably Linda Martinez at her grocery store or someone else who'd seen the orange glow against the night sky. The response time was actually good by Southside standards. But it didn't matter. Everyone inside was already dead or dying. Now, Marcus said quietly, now we go. They walked back to the BIC, moving quickly, but not running. Running drew attention. Marcus started the engine, pulled away from the curb with careful deliberation, turned south on Ashland Avenue, away from the approaching sirens. In his rearview mirror, the burning building lit up the night like a second sun, flames visible for miles. Terrell was hunched in the passenger seat, face in his hands, shoulders shaking. He asked Marcus, "What did we do? What the higher expletive did we do?" Marcus drove in silence. What could he say? Music, that it was justice. That it was necessary. That Ray and his crew had brought this on themselves by disrespecting the wrong man. All of those things were true, and none of them mattered. They'd eliminated 11 people, 11 lives ended, 11 families destroyed. And for what? A jacket, a principle, a code that demanded blood for blood, respect for respect, death for disrespect. They reached Marcus' apartment at 12:14 a.m. February 15, 1994. Valentine's Day was over. The day after had begun. Inside the apartment, Marcus and Terrell stripped off their clothes, put everything in a garbage bag, the work gloves, the jackets they'd worn, everything that might carry gasoline residue or smoke smell. Marcus wanted to burn it all, but that seemed like tempting fate. He'd created enough fire for one lifetime. They showered. Marcus went first, standing under hot water until it ran cold, watching gasoline residue swirl down the drain along with any claim to being a decent human being. When he closed his eyes, he saw faces at the window, heard screaming, saw Kesha Wallace jumping from the second floor. Terrell showered next. Marcus heard him crying behind the bathroom door. Heard him getting sick, throwing up until nothing came out but bile and guilt. At 1:30 a.m., they sat in Marcus's kitchen. Neither had spoken in over an hour. The television was on. Some late night talk show where the audience laughed at jokes neither brother could hear. The sound was just background noise, static to fill the terrible silence between them. Terrell said finally, "They're going to know it was us. Someone saw us. Someone had to." "I know," Marcus replied. "So, what do we do?" Marcus looked at his brother. Terrell was 23, but looked younger now. Looked like the kid Marcus had raised after their father died. Looked scared and small and broken. "We wait," Marcus said. "We wait for them to come. And then we face what we did." But the blood had been shed. The debt had been paid. The jacket was burned to ash along with 11 people who'd learned, too late, that some disrespect comes with consequences that can't be survived. At 6:47 a.m., when firefighters finally controlled the blaze enough to enter the building, they discovered remains that would take days to identify, families that would never recover, and a community that would carry the scar of Valentine's Day 1994 forever. Marcus Johnson had gotten his respect, had proven that nobody could take what was his and walk away laughing. But the price of that respect, paid in full, paid in fire, paid in lives, was higher than any code, any principle, any father's teaching could ever justify. 6:47 a.m. Tuesday, February 15, 1994, 7 hours after the last scream had died in the flames. Firefighter Michael O'Donnell from Engine Company, 61, had been fighting the blaze since midnight, 5 hours straight, rotating crews every 45 minutes because the heat was unbearable, even from across the street. The building at 6743 South Ashland Avenue had burned with an intensity that suggested accelerant, that suggested something more than accidental. By dawn, they'd finally knocked down the main fire enough to approach the structure, though hot spots still flared and smoke continued to pour from what remained of the collapsed floors. Michael was 43 years old, 21 years with the Chicago Fire Department. He'd pulled bodies from house fires before, usually one, maybe two victims, people who'd fallen asleep with cigarettes or space heaters positioned too close to curtains. He'd seen burn victims, knew what fire did to human flesh, had learned to compartmentalize the horror so he could do his job. But when he entered what had been the basement of 6743 South Ashland, when his flashlight beam cut through the smoke and settled on what the building collapse had created, a mass grave of charred debris, and human remains so intermingled, it was impossible to tell where one body ended and another began. Michael O'Donnell stood frozen for 30 seconds. That felt like hours. Then he backed out of the building, walked 20 feet away, pulled off his helmet and breathing apparatus, and vomited onto the frozen sidewalk. His captain asked him how many when Michael finally could speak. "I don't know. 8, maybe 10, maybe more." He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't find words for what he'd seen. The captain radioed for the medical examiner, for police, for everyone who dealt with mass casualty incidents in Chicago, though mass casualty usually meant gang shootings or car accidents, not this. Not an entire building full of bodies burned beyond recognition. By 8:30 a.m., the scene was crawling with personnel. Chicago Police Department homicide detectives, fire investigators, medical examiner staff preparing body bags. Though they'd need to wait hours more for the structure to cool enough for safe recovery operations. Yellow crime scene tape formed a perimeter 3 blocks in every direction. Detective Raymond Walsh arrived at 9:15 a.m. He was 41 years old, 19 years with CPD, currently assigned to the Area 2 Detective Division, covering Southside homicides. He'd investigated gang shootings, domestic murders, robbery killings, had seen Chicago's violence in most of its variations, but he'd never seen anything quite like this. The fire investigator, a woman named Susan Chen with 15 years of experience, met Walsh at the perimeter. Her face was grim. She stated without preamble, "Definitely arson. We found evidence of accelerant, gasoline, probably poured around the building's foundation. Both exits were chained and padlocked from the outside. This wasn't an accident. Someone locked these people in and burned them alive." Walsh felt his stomach tighten. He asked how many victims. Chen replied that they wouldn't know for certain until the ME's office did full recovery and analysis, but based on initial assessment, at least 10, possibly 11 or 12. "Jesus Christ," Walsh murmured. He had worked Chicago homicides for almost 2 decades, had seen the city's murder rate climb through the 80s and early 90s. But this was different. This was calculated. This was execution. Chen added there was one survivor, a 19-year-old male who jumped from a second-floor window, both legs shattered. He was at Stroger Hospital in critical condition. Walsh asked if he was conscious, if he could talk. Chen explained he was sedated for pain, but when he was conscious in the ambulance, he kept saying 2 names, Marcus and Terrell. While Walsh processed the crime scene, 2 miles away on South Hermitage Avenue, Dorothy Johnson was making breakfast for her grandsons like she did most Tuesday mornings. Eggs and toast, coffee that could wake the dead. The kitchen smelled like home, like safety, like the life she'd built over 74 years in this neighborhood. Marcus and Terrell sat at her table, neither eating, both looking like they hadn't slept, which they hadn't. Dorothy could see it in their eyes, something hollow, something broken. She'd seen that look before, on her son's face the week before he got shot down in 1987. The look of men who'd crossed into territory they couldn't come back from. She set plates in front of them and said, "You boys need to tell me what's wrong." Marcus looked at his grandmother, wanted to tell her everything, wanted to confess, to explain, to hear her say it would be okay, even though it never would be, but the words wouldn't come. "Just tired, Grandma," he said quietly. Dorothy sat down across from them, her arthritis, twisted hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "The news this morning said there was a fire on Ashland. Said people died. Music said it was arson." Neither brother spoke. "Marcus Anthony Johnson," Dorothy said, her voice sharp with the authority that comes from raising generations. "Look at me." Marcus met her eyes. "Did you have something to do with that fire?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus wanted to lie, wanted to protect her from the knowledge of what he'd become. But he'd never been able to lie to his grandmother. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. Dorothy's face didn't change expression, but tears started rolling down her weathered cheeks. "How many people?" "They're saying 11. She closed her eyes, sat there for a long moment, crying silently. When she opened her eyes again, they were red but clear. Your father taught you to stand up for yourself, to never let anyone disrespect you, but he never taught you to be a murderer. They took his jacket, Grandma. They laughed about it. Marcus argued. So, you burned them alive. 11 people over a jacket. Her voice broke on the last word. Terrell was crying now too, face in his hands. Hen music. We didn't mean for it to be like that. We just wanted it. I don't know what we wanted, but not this. Not this. Then what did you expect? Dorothy's voice was sharp with grief and fury. You chain the doors and light a fire, and think people are just going to walk away. You committed murder, both of you. Not in self-defense, not in a fight. You planned it. You executed it. You killed children. They weren't children. Marcus said. They were 19 years old as a child. 18 years old as a child. One of those girls was pregnant. Dorothy stood up, shaking with rage and sorrow. You took a woman's unborn baby. You took mothers' sons. You destroyed families who did nothing but exist in the same neighborhood as you. By noon Tuesday, Detective Walsh had established a timeline. The fire had been reported at 11:34 p.m. Monday night, Valentine's Day. First engine on scene at 11:41 p.m. Found the building fully engulfed. Both exits chained. Multiple witnesses reported seeing two men near the building around 11:05 p.m. Though descriptions were vague, black males, mid-20s, average height. Music, the survivor, Darnell Hayes, had regained consciousness around 10:00 a.m. through a haze of morphine and trauma. He told investigators what he remembered: a basement party. Suddenly smoke and fire, exits blocked, everyone panicking. He'd made it to a second-floor window. Jumped. Remembered hitting the ground. Nothing after that until he woke in the hospital. But he remembered the names Marcus and Terrell. Had heard them mentioned at the dice game 2 weeks ago, when that jacket got taken. Had heard someone say the Johnson brothers were pissed, that Marcus was the kind of guy who didn't forget nothing. Walsh ran the names through the system. Marcus Anthony Johnson, 27. Address on South Hermitage. One prior arrest, aggravated assault at age 17, charges dropped. Worked at an auto repair shop on Ashland. Terrell James Johnson, 23, same address. Juvenile records sealed. Worked at a warehouse on the southwest side. By 2 p.m., Walsh had established motive. Witnesses from the neighborhood told the same story. Ray Thomas and his crew had taken Marcus Johnson's leather jacket during a dice game 2 weeks ago. Some kind of disrespect situation. Marcus had walked away that night, hadn't caused trouble, but people said he had that look, the quiet kind of anger that doesn't go away. Just goes underground. Walsh said to his partner, Detective Maria Sanchez, that 11 people were dead over a jacket. They were sitting in an unmarked car outside Marcus' apartment building, waiting for backup before approaching. Sanchez, 36, who had grown up in Pilsen and knew how Southside beefs worked, replied, Not the first time. You grow up here. Disrespect is currency. You let someone punk you, word gets around. Suddenly you're a target, so you respond. Usually it's a beating, sometimes a shooting. But this, she gestured toward the building where they knew Marcus and Terrell were inside. This is something else. The arrest happened at 3:17 p.m., Tuesday, February 15th, less than 16 hours after the fire. 8 officers approached the apartment on South Hermitage with body armor and weapons drawn. Expecting resistance. Expecting maybe a shootout to end it all. What they found was Marcus and Terrell Johnson sitting at their grandmother's kitchen table, unarmed. Hands visible on the table in front of them. Dorothy Johnson stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, looking 10 years older than she had that morning. Her music, Marcus Anthony Johnson, Terrell James Johnson, Walsh said, his weapon trained on Marcus. You're under arrest for 11 counts of first-degree murder and aggravated arson. Stand up slowly. Keep your hands where we can see them. Marcus stood. His movements were slow, deliberate, calm, like he'd been expecting this. Like some part of him was relieved it was finally over. We're not going to resist. Marcus said quietly. "We did what we did. Now we'll face what comes next." Terrell was shaking as he stood, tears running down his face. But he raised his hands without argument. The officers cuffed them both, patted them down, found nothing. No weapons, no evidence except the guilt written on their faces. As Walsh led Marcus toward the door, Dorothy Johnson grabbed her grandson's arm. "Why?" she whispered. "Just tell me why." Marcus looked at her. The grandmother who'd raised him. The woman who'd survived losing her husband, losing her son, and now had to watch her grandsons destroy themselves over pride and a leather jacket. "Because I'm my father's son," Marcus said. "He taught me never to let anyone disrespect me." "Your father," Dorothy said, her voice breaking, "died with his code. And now you're going to live without your freedom because you followed it. That jacket your father left you. It burned in that fire, Marcus. It's ash. Everything you did, every person you killed, it was all for something that doesn't even exist anymore." They led Marcus away, led Terrell away, left Dorothy Johnson standing in her doorway, watching police cars drive away with both her grandsons in the back, knowing she'd probably never see them free again. By evening Tuesday, the news had spread through West Inglewood like wildfire. 11 dead. The Johnson brothers responsible. The whole neighborhood had an opinion. At Harold's Chicken on 63rd Street, conversations grew heated. Some said Marcus and Terrell were monsters who'd murdered innocent people in cold blood. Others said they were men driven to desperate measures by disrespect in a culture where disrespect could get you killed. Jerome Washington, who ran a barber shop on Ashland Avenue and had known Marcus since he was a kid, said, "I'm not saying what they did was right, but I understand it. You grow up here. You learn that respect is all you got. Money comes and goes. Jobs disappear. But if you let someone make you look weak, you become prey." Marcus was following the same code every man on these streets follows. He just took it further than most. But the families of the victims demanded justice. 11 families destroyed. Kesha Wallace's mother stood outside the burned building holding a sonogram photo, the baby that would never be born. Antoine Mercer's father, who'd worked 2 jobs to put his son through 2 years of college, stood beside her holding his son's business textbooks. Jerome Little's mother brought the suit he'd bought for his job interview, still in dry cleaning plastic. At Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church, Pastor Elijah Thompson struggled through Tuesday evening service. He asked, "Why? Why this violence? Why this loss? Why couldn't young men resolve their differences without bloodshed?" He had no answers, just grief and the terrible knowledge that his congregation had been cut in half by one night, when honor became murder and respect became ash. The neighborhood split down the middle. Some understood Marcus's code, even if they couldn't condone his actions. Others saw only 11 lives ended, 11 families destroyed, and demanded the maximum punishment. And everyone knew that whatever verdict eventually came, West Inglewood would never heal completely. But the question that haunted Detective Walsh, that haunted Dorothy Johnson, that haunted every person who'd grown up on the South Side learning the code that Marcus had followed, was simple and terrible. Where was the line? At what point did standing up for yourself become murder? When did honor become horror? And how many more people had to die before someone figured out that respect earned through fear wasn't respect at all? It was just terror wearing a different name. The trial of Marcus Anthony Johnson and Terrell James Johnson began in September of 1994 in a Cook County courtroom on Chicago's South Side. The case had attracted national attention, one of the deadliest incidents of gang-related arson in Chicago history. 11 victims, brothers who'd planned and executed mass murder over a stolen jacket. 43 combined charges of first-degree murder and aggravated arson. The prosecution had physical evidence, survivor testimony from Darnell Hayes, and a timeline so detailed it left no room for reasonable doubt. Hand music, the chains and padlocks recovered from the scene. Gasoline residue traced to purchases at 3 different locations. Witnesses who'd seen 2 men, matching the brothers' descriptions near the building. The defense, 2 overworked public defenders, who looked exhausted from day one, attempted to argue that this was a case of temporary insanity brought on by extreme disrespect in a culture where disrespect could be fatal. They painted a picture of young men raised in a war zone, taught by their father that honor was everything, trapped in a neighborhood where showing weakness meant death. They called witnesses who testified about Southside violence, about the code that governed street life, about how being disrespected and not responding could get you eliminated. The prosecution destroyed that argument in under 3 hours. Temporary insanity doesn't involve 2 weeks of planning, doesn't involve purchasing chains at hardware stores, doesn't involve surveillance and mapping escape routes. This wasn't madness driven by sudden rage. This was premeditated mass murder dressed up in the language of honor and respect. The jury, 12 Chicagoans who understood urban violence but hadn't lived the specific pressures of West Englewood, deliberated for 19 hours over 3 days. On September 28, 1994, they returned their verdict guilty, all charges, both defendants. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Marcus Anthony Johnson, life in prison without possibility of parole. Terrell James Johnson, life in prison without possibility of parole. When the judge read the sentences, Marcus showed no emotion, no tears, no shock, just a slight nod, as if he'd known from the moment he struck that match that this was exactly where he'd end up. Terrell broke down crying, but Marcus remained stone-faced, accepting his fate with the same cold calculation he'd brought to planning the fire. The only thing Marcus asked for was 5 minutes with his grandmother, Dorothy. The request was denied. Marcus Johnson served 30 years in the Menard Correctional Center in southern Illinois. During that time, he worked in the prison library, teaching other inmates to read, helping them prepare for GED exams. He was quiet, respected even by violent offenders, never sought trouble. Guards said he was one of the most disciplined inmates they'd ever known, methodical, routine-oriented, almost peaceful. Dorothy Johnson visited every month for 18 years, taking the Greyhound bus from Chicago to the prison. A 6-hour journey each way. Music. She never missed a visit until her health began failing. She died of complications from diabetes in 2012, 86 years old. Marcus wasn't allowed to attend her funeral. According to the prison chaplain, Marcus didn't cry when he received the news. He just sat in his cell for 3 days, refused meals, and when he finally emerged, he'd aged 10 years and 72 hours. On March 3, 2024, at 57 years old, Marcus Johnson died of a heart attack in the prison infirmary at 4:23 a.m. The chaplain on duty reported that Marcus' last coherent words were, "Tell Terrell, I'm sorry. Tell him it wasn't worth it." Whether he truly believed that in his final moment, or was just trying to give his brother some peace, nobody knows. He was buried in the prison cemetery with a simple marker, Marcus A. Johnson, 1966-2024. No mention of father, brother, son, just dates marking the beginning and end of a life that had transformed from honest work to unthinkable violence over a principle that died in flames along with 11 people. Terrell James Johnson remains incarcerated at Stateville Correctional Center outside Chicago. He's 53 now, parole denied in 2014 and 2024. Unlike his brother, Terrell never found peace in prison. He's been written up dozens of times for fighting, spent years in segregation, struggles with depression and PTSD. In a rare 2019 interview with a criminal justice reform advocate, Terrell said, "Every night I see their faces. Every night I hear them screaming. Marcus told me it would be worth it, that we'd get respect. But I ain't got respect. I just got nightmares and a cell I'll die in." Chenice, Terrell's girlfriend, tried to stay connected for the first year, visited 3 times, then stopped coming. She married someone else in 1997, had 2 children, and moved to Atlanta. When contacted by reporters on the 20th anniversary of the fire, she declined to comment except to say, "Shamusic. That was a different life. I'm not that person anymore." Dorothy Johnson's apartment on South Hermitage remained in the family until her death. After she passed, distant relatives sold it. The new owners don't know its history. Don't know that 2 brothers planned mass murder at the kitchen table. Don't know that a grandmother cried herself to sleep every night wondering where she'd failed in raising them. Darnell Hayes, the sole survivor, lived but never truly recovered. The fall from the 2nd floor window shattered both legs, compound fractures that required 6 surgeries, and left him with chronic pain and a permanent limp. He walks with a cane, works part-time at a community center in Inglewood, and lives on disability payments. In interviews over the years, he's spoken carefully about that night. "I survived the fire, but I didn't survive what it did to my head. I got survivor's guilt. I got PTSD. I got pain that wakes me up every night. Sometimes I think maybe dying would have been easier." He never finished high school. Never pursued his rap career. Never fully healed physically or mentally. The families of the 11 victims scattered across Chicago and beyond, each carrying their own grief and questions. Kesha Wallace's mother, Linda, never recovered from losing both her daughter and her unborn grandchild. She died of a stroke in 2003, 54 years old. Friends said she'd aged 30 years in the 9 years since the fire. That grief had consumed her from the inside out. Antoine Mercer's father, who'd worked 2 jobs to put his son through college, sold his house and moved to Atlanta to live with his sister. He died in 2011, 73 years old, having never spoken publicly about what happened. His obituary made no mention of Antoine. The loss was too heavy to acknowledge in print. Jerome Little's mother remained in West Inglewood. She turned Jerome's room into a shrine. His interview suit still hanging in the closet. His application materials on the desk. Everything preserved exactly as he'd left it. On February 14th, she gives tours to at-risk youth, showing them what violence destroys, showing them the price of codes that demand blood for disrespect. She tells them, "My son died for nothing. Over a jacket. Over respect that don't mean nothing when you're dead." LaShonda Price's family created a nursing scholarship in her name at the vocational school, where she'd been studying. Since 1995, the LaShonda Price Memorial Scholarship has helped 37 young women from the South Side complete nursing assistant programs. It's a small light in enormous darkness. But it's something, a way to make meaning from meaninglessness. West Inglewood changed after that Valentine's Day night, but not in the ways people hoped. The immediate aftermath saw increased police presence, community meetings, promises of intervention programs, but the change wasn't permanent. Within 5 years, budget cuts eliminated most programs. Violence continued. Disrespect still demanded answers. Young men still died over principles that didn't survive them. The code that Marcus followed, never let anyone disrespect you, always hit back. Protect your honor at any cost. That code persists because it emerges from conditions that haven't changed: poverty, lack of opportunity, broken families. Communities where the only currency that matters is respect, because everything else has been taken away. Detective Raymond Walsh, who investigated the case, retired from CPD in 2015 after 37 years of service. In a 2020 podcast interview about the case, he said, "Technically, Marcus and Terrell Johnson were mass murderers. Legally, there's no question. But morally, it's more complicated. They grew up in a place where disrespect could get you killed, where letting someone punk you marked you as prey. They were following rules they'd been taught since childhood, the same rules their father followed until it got him shot. The law says one thing, the street says another. That contradiction is something I've had to live with every day since February 15, 1994. Music. Marcus Johnson's story has no heroes. It has two brothers who loved each other more than their own futures, and 11 young people who'd made choices, some thoughtless, some cruel, some simply human, that set tragedy in motion. It has a system that failed at every level, a neighborhood abandoned by investment, schools that couldn't educate, police who couldn't protect, families broken by poverty and violence, and a code of honor so rigid it made mass murder seem like the only response to disrespect. Were Marcus and Terrell Johnson murderers? Yes. They eliminated 11 people with premeditation and planning, locked them in a building, and burned them alive without trial, without mercy, without consideration for anyone except their own sense of honor. Were they also products of a broken system, raised in a culture where survival demanded violent responses to disrespect, trapped by a code their father had taught them? Also, yes. The uncomfortable truth is both things can be true simultaneously. And that's the most disturbing part of this story, because it forces us to ask questions we'd rather avoid. What would we do in their place? How far would we go to protect our honor? Does justice exist when the system has completely failed? Is there a line between righteous anger and unforgivable violence? Or do impossible circumstances erase that line entirely? The Johnson brothers crossed a boundary no human being should cross. But that boundary existed in a world where disrespect could be fatal, where codes of honor replaced absent institutions, where young men learned that respect was the only thing you controlled when everything else had been taken away, where a stolen jacket could mean the difference between being seen as strong or being marked as weak and vulnerable. There's no easy answer, no clear moral, no satisfying conclusion where good triumphs and evil is punished. Just a simple and terrible truth: violence breeds violence. Broken systems create their own monsters, and sometimes the line between justice and revenge becomes so thin, it disappears entirely, leaving only ashes and questions and families destroyed on both sides. 30 years have passed since that Valentine's Day night on Chicago's South Side. West Englewood hasn't healed. It's evolved, adapted, found new ways to struggle. Every year, families face impossible choices when systems fail them. Every year, some choose violence. Some survive their choices, others don't. But all of them carry the weight of living in a city where justice doesn't always reach the forgotten neighborhoods, where protecting your honor sometimes means becoming what you fear most, where a stolen leather jacket can somehow lead to 11 funerals and 2 brothers spending their lives in cages. The building at 6743 South Ashland Avenue was demolished in 1995. Today it's an empty lot surrounded by chain link fence, weeds growing through cracked concrete. There's no memorial, no plaque, no historical marker explaining that this was the site of one of Chicago's deadliest gang-related fires. The city just moved on. Children play on the sidewalk where Kesha Wallace's body hit the pavement. Families walk past the lot where 11 people burned alive, completely unaware of the history beneath their feet. Life continued as it always does, covering scars with layers of normality until they almost disappear. Almost. On cold February nights, neighbors say they still smell smoke. They don't, of course, but memory has its own logic. And on Chicago's South Side, some debts never get settled. They just keep collecting interest year after year, generation after generation, code after code, until someone finally asks the question nobody wants to answer. When does honor become horror? When does respect become murder? And how many more people have to die before we understand that revenge doesn't heal? It only creates new wounds that will demand their own revenge in turn. Revenge doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't restore lost honor. It doesn't heal broken codes. It only creates new dead, new wounds, new cycles that trap everyone in their orbit. Marcus Johnson saved his pride, but lost his freedom, and eventually his life. He responded to disrespect, but created 11 shattered families. He followed his father's code, but proved that some codes cost more than their worth. Music, in the end, only one question remains. One each of us must answer for ourselves. Was it worth it? Remember, the monsters we fear aren't always born that way. Sometimes they're made one broken code, one stolen jacket, one desperate decision at a time.